Hello folks, and welcome to the Rifle Company Butterworth podcast. My name is Sean Arthur, and I'm one of the 9,000 Rifle Company Butterworth veterans who served at Butterworth Air Base in Malaysia. In this series, we're going to explore the hidden story of one of the longest conflicts in the Australian Army's military history. In duration, it was second only to the war in Afghanistan. However, long before Afghanistan, there was another long conflict that lasted from 1970 to 1989, a full 19 years. Weirdly, this conflict has been erased from the Australian Defence Force's military record. Or should I say, it was never permitted to enter into the record in the first place. This was Rifle Company Butterworth, that is, the long military defence of Air Force Base in Butterworth situated in northern Malaysia. In this episode we shall explore basic Army recruit training. It won't be a 101 introduction, but it will give you a little taste. In later episodes, when we come to subjects like rules of engagement or ROE, you will be able to appreciate the difficulties of compliance even with the best of intentions. In this episode, I will only be talking about recruit or OR training. OR stands for other ranks, or those soldiers who are not officers. A rifleman just doesn't pop into existence. Centuries of thought and refinement have gone into the process of turning a civilian into a soldier. Think about it. How do you get a normal, rational human being and have them run towards extreme danger? I mean, have them literally run towards life-ending situations. It's nuts. Having this person do something that no sane person would ever dream of doing. So, one must first break down civilian sensibilities and place them with a warrior's mentality. And I do mean, corny as it sounds, a warrior's mentality. I'm not trying to sound melodramatic. The recruitment videos don't show you what the true purpose of the infantry role is. Underneath the brass and polish and the riding about in helicopters and friendly games of rugby, the infantry has another ugly side. Polite civilian society employs men and women to enforce government policy for the protection of the nation. In other words, the infantry sometimes has to take someone's life and to risk their own life being taken in return. This risk carries a psychological load that all service people carry as a matter of course. The recent Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide showed that there are on average 3 deaths by suicide by serving or ex-serving members every 2 weeks. That is more than 4 times the national average compared to the Australian male population for self-death. A serving or former serving soldier, airman or sailor takes their own life in numbers that would be a scandal in any other industry. But until very recently, it was completely invisible. Invisible, that is, apart from the grieving families of those members. Do you still think I'm being a bit melodramatic? Anyway, back to the training story. Before I became a regular soldier, I actually first joined the Citizens Military Forces, or CMF, which was a forerunner to the Army Reserve in 1975. I ended up being recruited from a shopping centre mall static display in Mitchelton, Brisbane. I thought that the shopping centre soldiers must have been commandos, based upon their recruiting pitch to me. They certainly looked the part, being all cammed up with green and black face paint. However, they were actually from the Ordnance Corps, which is a vital logistics support arm, but they're not warfighters. This mob from the shopping centre was from the 1st Base Vehicle Depot, and it was a truck transport unit. Had I known it, I was really signing up to be a part-time Army truck driver. That is, if I persisted with the Army Reserve, which I did not. So I joined the Army just as the Vietnam War spiralled into its inevitable, messy end. I just had turned 17 years old, and I had a 9th grade education behind me, and I worked as a storeman/shop assistant in a Catholic bookstore. If that sounds to you like the Army had hit the ignorance trifecta with me, you would be right. Virtually all of the Ordnance Unit's NCOs were Vietnam vets, most of whom had served as storemen in Vietnam at the Australian Logistics Base at Vung Tau. The unit's senior NCOs were too old for service in Vietnam. They were mostly kindly old buffers who treated the Army Reserve as a paid hobby, which it sorta was. I did what was laughably called A-Res recruit training over a few weekends. This was mostly lectures about various things and the odd rifle range shoot. Compared to what was coming later in the regular army, it was mostly belly rubs and back pats. Still, the Army Reserve gave my life purpose, something that was definitely missing in my old Catholic bookstore existence. Before my first year was up, I quit the reserves and I joined the Australian Regular Army at the beginning of 1976. I was sent down to Wagga Wagga by train with a bunch of other unknown victims to the ritual bloodbath that was known as the 1st Recruit Training Battalion, Kapooka, or 1RTB. Recruit training is a hard slog for all concerned, not only for the recruit but also for the instructor. Military instruction is not fun for the person who has to mould a teenager into someone who has to shun comfort and endure intense hardship. Every 3 months, a new batch of shaggy-haired recruits would be unceremoniously dumped from the buses. They would soon learn that everything they thought they ever knew was wrong, and frankly, quite rubbish. Take walking, for instance. One might suppose that one was already quite familiar with the bipedal process of placing one foot down in front of the other. Oh, my dear child, how wrong you are. Marching up and down the square will become an important, no, an essential skill, and a never-ending opportunity for the instructor to point out that your mother birthed a complete idiot. You've seen all the movies before. Recruit training is hell to a young soul. The sheer nonsense might best be described as surround sound fault finding. Everyone is screaming at you, every task is convoluted. Day one, we had our first formal lesson on making a bed, but you had to learn how to make a bed the army way. Lots of coins being tossed onto tightly folded bedding. This is followed by having the bed that you just made with loving attention torn apart about 30 times because it wasn't made to the precise Kapooka specifications. At this stage, the civilian still residing inside the army recruit is utterly befuddled. With each seemingly pointless rebuke, the civilian recedes further and further away into the background until eventually the civilian is no more. The 1RTB atmosphere was loud and chaotic at all times, so much so that the training staff had to take it in turns to scream at the recruits just to spare their voices. This might have suited the training staff, but the recruits never got a break. It was constant stress and confusion, with every second of the day planned and played out like a torture production line. The day you arrived, you went through a battery of physical tests which graded your personal fitness. That same day, you also began a whirlwind of medical examinations and inoculations, whose side effects could be spectacular. Recruits were not only dropping into a dead faint on fitness runs, but also passing out during lunch due to the chemicals recently introduced into your bloodstream. Buried deep inside the madness was a tried and true process for turning civilians into soldiers. Compared to the Army Reserve recruit training, this felt like being dragged along behind a speeding train. At recruit training, the Vietnam War was never very far away. Just about all the NCO staff were Vietnam vets. We were to learn they took their role as trainers very seriously because, well, they had seen some stuff. My section commander was from an artillery regiment. My platoon sergeant was from the Armoured Corps. He had been an armoured personnel carrier crew commander in Vietnam. Only my platoon commander was not a Vietnam vet. He was an army pilot, but we only very rarely interacted with him anyway. Most of the other instructional staff had Vietnam War medals, and most were infantry soldiers, selected from every battalion in the army. However, they did care about their recruit charges, and they cared deeply. And as the training progressed, the general harassment lessened, and the humour became more and more pronounced. Our never-ending drill on the program became more polished, and eventually the instructors started working us on the more basic of martial arts, such as shooting. We kept our service rifle locked in our personal cupboard, minus the bolt, and woe betide the fool who even momentarily stepped out of the room without first locking up the cupboard. The recruits discovered that there were basically only 4 different types of padlock issued, so any recruit could unlock at least 25% of the platoon's lockers with their own personal key. Instead of mass thefts, hijinks amongst the recruits soon ensued. A recruit would open up his locker before a snap inspection to discover a fully inflated blow-up doll staring sightlessly towards the viewer, or perhaps a beautiful love letter written specifically to the platoon sergeant from the recruit whose locker security was compromised by army penny pinching. The whole time I was in the army, I was as skinny as a rake. Over the time, so many platoon sergeants had tried to fatten me up, but it was all in vain. It just couldn't be done. in recruit training, dressed in my baggy green uniform, I looked like a badly made salad sandwich. I also discovered to my own surprise, and to that of the training staff, that I was a pretty decent shot with the self-loading rifle, the SLR. I had previously no real experience with firearms, nor did I ever manage to maintain any interest in guns throughout my entire service career that wasn't professionally motivated. To me, they were just tools of the trade, as a spanner is to a mechanic, a power drill is to a carpenter, or a bag of cash to a politician. The recruits mostly had the weekends off duty, and after the first 6 weeks in Kapooka, they were permitted local leave in the township of Wagga on weekends. I can say truthfully that I never left the base once during recruit training, with the exception of a short 4 days home leave during Easter 1976. Mostly I never left my room when not on duty. A lot of us didn't. We spent our off-duty time going on runs, polishing boots and cleaning equipment. We would also brush each other up on drill or weapons training. Now that I think about it, just how dull was that long 12 weeks. Wagga Wagga in 1976 held no appeal to me anyway. The local Wagga girls detested the horny recruits. Most of us were about as sophisticated as a dead trout. What's the point of getting all dressed up in your polys, that is your polyester dress uniform, just to end up in the dreary Wagga RSL club getting hammered? A surprising collection though, just wanted to leave the confines of the recruit base for a few hours. The base did have a movie theatre and also a bar. We called it the Boozer. But the movies the Army chose for us were as bad as you might imagine. And unfortunately, video streaming services weren't even a distant dream. This was even before blockbuster video stores, and I suppose videotape itself. The barracks didn't have a TV or stereo or cassette player or radio. The single choice of entertainment was the Boozer, and overindulging in alcohol was too much like Russian roulette to the recruits, who had severe physical challenges to perform every waking minute. Today we live in a world where we can't escape technology for even 10 minutes straight. But in the autumn of 1976, we're living a recruit barracks life that wouldn't be seen as all that remote in 1915. So I'm afraid the Boozer it was. And I was never much of a drinker, having just turned 18. The other blokes in our 4-man room just spent our time bullshitting as we worked on our gear. Off duty we dressed in singlets and undershorts. We got dressed up to the military nines to take meals at the mess, as was the mandatory custom. And then we dressed down again on our return for yet more cleaning, sleeping or reading. On Monday morning 6 a.m, the hated reveille would play through the speakers on the roof. The speakers were the only permitted and much hated technology on the entire base. And another week in the Hades would commence, and so it went on for 12 long weeks. About week 9, all the recruits were called into the platoon office to offer our preferences in choosing our regimental corps after recruit training. We had to provide 3 preferences in priority order, and the Army would consider where we would go for the next stage of our military life. The deal was that they would try and fit us into one of our 3 preferences, but they wouldn't guarantee anything. Trying to accommodate was the only thing on the table. This was a big day for the recruits. All 30 of us in our platoon would endlessly discuss the pros and cons of each Army Corps in turn. There were in fact 2 guaranteed postings for those who picked them. One was Catering Corps and the other was Medical Corps. The Army could not compel you to join either Catering or Medical Corps. A recruit could be forced into any other occupation except for those 2. Presumably, cooks and medics never got enough willing recruits and were therefore happy to get any volunteers proving willing. On the upside, both postings came with civilian trades behind them after their service careers were finished. Those cooking and nursing jobs were locked in for life for those who wanted them. A couple of recruits did opt for one or the other, so they alone knew for certain in advance where they were going after Kapooka. The rest of us were in the dark. When my turn came, I opted for Armoured Corps first because, like the kid I was, I liked the idea of driving tanks for a living. Secondly, I chose Signal Corps because chatting on the radio sounded like a cruisy job. Plus my dad was an Army signaller with the 2nd 6th Cavalry Commando Regiment in Papua New Guinea during the Second World War. So there was that. My third choice was artillery because, well, I didn't know what else to pick. There were over 20 different corps in the Australian Army at the time, and I drew a mental blank after my second choice. My secret fear was that I'd be sent to Ordnance Corps because of my previous, although very slight experience in the Army Reserve. I just didn't want an office job in the military. In advance of this potential offer, I had prepared a long set of complex arguments in the event that I was to be sent pushing a pin in Ordnance Corps. The following week, we were called in one at a time to be told of our future corps. Exciting. There were a couple of other corps results in the platoon that were of no surprise to anyone. One of our number was an actual Vietnam veteran who had signed up once more. Not only had he rejoined the Army, but he was also a former NCO in the Armoured Corps and had served in Vietnam with our current platoon sergeant. He wanted to return to the armoured personnel carriers, which were the infantry Uber of the day. So he got his wish to wear the black beret once more, which was the signature headgear of the tankies. His experience during recruit training was vastly different to that of ours. He was the only one who seemed to actually enjoy recruit training. Nothing was of the slightest surprise to him. He was ex-national service, so this was his second go on the merry-go-round. Yet another exception from us was a red-headed recruit who was the son of a general. Naturally, he got his first pick too, the Armoured Corps, just like his daddy. Nepotism never hurt your chances in large institutions. The rest of us considered him to be an insufferable snob, and he had few friends anyway. A general's son tends to act like a general's son. But the real surprise was another slightly older recruit who nabbed his first choice too. He elected to go to the Survey Corps. To the shock of all present, and because he had the relevant civilian university qualifications, he was handed sergeant stripes on march out a couple of weeks later. He was a very nice bloke, and it totally blew our tiny minds that someone could go from recruit to the exalted high rank of sergeant in a single day. I mean, officers held very high rank to us lowly grubs, but it was the sergeants who actually ran the army. Everybody knew that. The rest of us were thrilled just to be officially made privates on march out instead of our hated recruit rank. Yet he became an instant sergeant. For a couple of hours before we all bomb-blasted in different directions to commence our new careers, this quiet, unassuming and newly minted NCO became a god to us. As for me and the rest of the recruit gang, I hear you ask, the entirety of the remaining platoon were posted to infantry corps. The whole blooming bunch of us, about 25 of us. Whatever it was we put down as our core preference, we were all to become grunts. We were asked if we had any objections, and I for one had none. I was so relieved at not getting ordnance. I wasn't going to be a storeman after all, and that made me pretty happy. Some recruits did have objections and voiced them. It was hard luck for them because they were told that they were still going to become grunts nevertheless. Why the nickname grunts? It was a rare loanword from the American infantry from Vietnam. Australians tend to reject American slang. We prefer our own. But this particular nickname really fitted the experience of an infantryman's life. It exemplified the blue-collar vibe, and it has a very accurate onomatopoeia of the job. Onomatopoeia describes a word that sounds like sounds. So the word slap sounds like a slap, or sizzle sounds exactly like the word so described. Cooking a sausage has a sizzling sound. Sizzle sounds like sizzle. However, the word car doesn't sound like the noise a car makes. According to the Australian Department of Defence Science and Technology, a modern rifleman carries an ordinary equipment burden of 46 kilograms, whilst a gunner carries approximately 57 kilograms. That is day pack, rations, water, general equipment such as entrenching tools, big pack, ammunition and weapons. Sometimes the weight burden exceeds this weight by a significant amount. The section may be tasked to carry anti-armour weaponry or man-pack spare mortar rounds. And the radioman wears his communication equipment on his back along with everything else. Now, it should be emphasised that this isn't an exercise in weightlifting. You don't pick it up briefly, hold it for a couple of seconds, and then put it down again. What you put on your back isn't easily taken off again. You live with that weight for weeks and months. Your backpack and webbing rubs flaming red sore patches onto your shoulders. You can't take the pack off when it hurts, or even to momentarily relieve the soreness. You just have to accept the pain. And the shocking thing about the army, it teaches you that this pain acceptance is achievable. The dead weight becomes your very life for the duration. You patrol in it, you force march in it, and you run with it. Every time you lie on the ground, you have to return to a vertical position again with all that weight on your back, and again and again and again, all day, every day. An infantryman is forever dropping prone on the ground with a sudden whomp. If you go down, you must get up again. So you actually begin to hear the weary, soft grunts from your mates all the time. You hear yourself grunting when climbing uphill, or digging in rifle pits in hard, stony ground, or hauling filled jerry cans of water back to your hilltop positions during working parties. Grunting sounds soon become familiar to you as the sound of power tools to a carpenter. A grunt is a fitting description for an infantryman as any other. But back to recruit training. So for the last week at 1 RTB, we all proudly wore our call badges instead of the recruit's rising sun. We had made it. Now I just had to figure out what it meant to be an infantryman. If the listener has no real idea what happens in an infantry battalion, you are now standing in my shoes in the winter of 1976. During our first week of recruit training, as part of our general testing, we all had been given aptitude and educational testing. I'm pretty sure that I did badly in these tests. Rumour had it that if you flunked these tests, it was a quick ride to the infantry. But I would later learn that grunts generally had the brightest minds in the army, and I'm not even joking. Not too many people can say that making an everyday decision, and I do mean every single day, getting it wrong might actually end up killing you. The truly stupid usually take themselves out of the gene pool one way or another. During gun pickets in the middle of the night, we would engage in soft conversation while we watched out the bad guys. The conversational topics would range all over the place. Usually it was girls. No, mostly it was girls. Otherwise it was football or cars. But sometimes in the darkness you would hear about a mate's troubled home life, or a parent who didn't stick around. Or sometimes deep psychological discussions would surface that educated me in ways that I would never have imagined. One very hot night I shared a gun picket with an Aboriginal friend who hailed from a remote community in Central Australia. He was actually the coolest bloke I ever knew. He explained to me that the book and movie Clockwork Orange was not about violence, which the first third of the movie expends itself upon, but was really about the personal freedom to choose either good or evil. That if the state has the ability to force good, then the individual loses that ability to choose it. It is the free choice of the decision that actually creates the good. And all this from a fellow dumb grunt. It was from mates like him that I began to develop an interest in questioning the status quo. I learnt more from such chaps than I ever did from formal schooling. He also told me stories about his personal Aboriginal dream time with such conviction that I too began to believe in the realism. One that I remember was the Kadaichi man, who was the executioner of the tribes. The executioner never touches the victim, nor has any other physical interaction with them. Serious crimes in the Indigenous community did not go unpunished, and the Kadaichi man showing up caused a great deal of fear and anxiety. Had I never joined the army, I would never have met this fascinating fellow soldier. I asked him in the late night if he truly believed in the Kadaichi man, and he chuckled and said, of course he did. He had seen him with his own eyes. To the average civilian in the 1970s, as well as the mass media, tended to view the military as the bottom of the barrel career during those years. It was a job for those with few other options. And following Vietnam, in a great many ways, it really was true. But the army was not responsible for society's failings. It never is. If work was not available outside, why not, say, be an army truck driver? Why not do it while wearing a baggy green jungle suit? But like any other hierarchical organisation, there was always someone to look down your nose at, even within the army. And to the rest of the army, it was infantry, or the dumb grunts, as we're often called. Any soldier could always feel superior to the infantry. The grunts, as a consequence, turned the insult on its head. As infantrymen, we accepted the pain, the hardship, the boredom, and the exposure from the hostile elements. And in doing so, we despised anyone who took the Queen's shilling only to slink into what we considered to be a civilian occupation. If you weren't a grunt, you're a pogo. Simple as that. Even if untrue for the other combat arms of the army. It was difficult to argue against. In terms of being killed or wounded in action, no other call were even on the scoreboard. Calling the rest of the army pogos was our only defensive slur against the dismissive attitudes thrown towards us. And it was very effective too, and a sure way of starting a fight in any pub in the country. The morning came when we had the traditional 1 RTB Kapooka march-out parade. There was a speech from the CO, dress inspections, a full military brass band, drums, and a fair bit of marching up and down the parade ground. Then lunch, then shockingly sudden, all of us marked as infantry types were filing into an RAAF C-130 transport plane and taking off from the nearby Wagga Air Force Base to be flown directly to Laverick Barracks in Townsville. After steadily climbing the recruit ladder for 12 weeks and up to the point where we were awarded the coveted Corps badge for our Australian slouch hat, we were to be sent to our prospective parent unit. In my case, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, or 1 RAR. It was here that we were to begin our infantry training. This is different. Unlike the usual process, we were conducting our IETs in-house and not their School of Infantry in Singleton, New South Wales. So we resided in the in-between world where we were no longer recruits, but we were also not yet trained infantrymen. Like the dolts we were, we kept saluting everything, including inanimate objects, and generally getting underfoot until the training started. I'll end this episode by giving you a snapshot of my new home, 1 RAR. 1 RAR was raised at the termination of the Second World War on the 23rd of November 1948. Originally, it was raised as the 65th Australian Infantry Battalion, specifically as part of the British Commonwealth Occupation Force, or the BCOF, or Japan. The battalion's first real battle honours were from Korea, where it was sent in 1952, and it stayed in Korea right there through to the war's end in 1953. Luckily, 1 RAR was in Korea only for the static part of the war, and not the earlier phase, where the Allies first chased the enemy and then, in turn, were chased themselves by the enemy up and down the Korean peninsula. 1 RAR's war in Korea was mainly active patrolling and sometimes doing so in the brutal Korean winter. The battalion lost 11 killed in action and over 30 wounded in action in Korea. 1 RAR's other battalion honours included the First Malayan Emergency, the Vietnam War, Somalia, East Timor, and Afghanistan. It is the intention of the Rifle Company Butterworth veterans to have the Second Malaysian Emergency added to 1 RAR's battle honours, along with every other battalion who served with distinction in Butterworth. The most famous battle, to my time, involving 1 RAR was the Battle of Coral Balmoral in Vietnam, which happened 8 years earlier in May 1968. The People's Army of Vietnam and the Viet Cong were withdrawing from the capital in Saigon following their May offensive. 1 and 3 RAR were sent from Bok Tai province to the northeast to sit astride the withdrawal route used by the enemy. The Australian battalions were blocking 2 enemy regiments that were approximately twice our size. The Australian task force was attacked twice, severely, and 25 Australians were killed. At one point, the enemy had taken the 1st Battalion's mortars, and allegedly, it resulted in the last bayonet charge in Australia's military history in recovering them. 1 RAR's nickname is called the Big Blue nowadays, but it wasn't so called back in the day when I was part of the unit establishment. And so the world turns. So us raw recruits were joining a proven and battle-hardened unit with lots of military history. I wore 1 RAR's blue lanyard on the shoulder and the jungle green puggaree on the slouch hat. The hatband, the puggaree, was very distinctive. It was the only battalion in the regiment to wear a jungle green puggaree. In a service note for its uniformity, this was a great departure in uniform. When I swapped battalions after RCB, I kept the 1 RAR's dark green puggaree on my informal slouch hat when at 89 RAR. My new 89 RAR's company second in command repeatedly directed that I change the hatband over to the regular unit's olive drab puggaree. I never ever would, and continued to wear the dark green 1 RAR puggaree. This calculated disobedience from a private soldier seemed to amuse our beloved captain. He was a Vietnam veteran and an ex-OR himself, and apparently still retained the digger's sense of humour. So every day he ordered me to change it over, and every day I said that I would, but I never did. This was our little joke, and he never involved the NCOs, who clearly didn't understand the joke, but they permitted it to happen nevertheless. So you can see how I went out of my way not to invite promotion. My platoon commander at 89 RAR would often look at me and say, "Jocularity, jocularity, Private Arthur." I didn't have the first idea what he was talking about. 1 RAR was my battalion at Rifle Company Butterworth, one of the two in which I served. But every single Australian battalion has such battle honours, and all have suffered such losses. And each of those battalions have stood on the shoulders of other distinguished units, and those on more distant shoulders. As soldiers, we were taught all this before we could even shave properly. We believed then in all the battalion honours and traditions, and we still do. Until the day, that is, when 9,000 men of Rifle Company Butterworth were informed that although we did what we were told to do, there was no place for us in the line. The politicians and the bureaucracy had decided otherwise, on an admitted lie and told for public consumption. Now that basic recruit training is done with, the next episode, number 3, will examine the more advanced level of infantry education, that is IETs, or Initial Employment Training, or simply Advanced Infantry Training, learning to become that most precious of all things Army, an ordinary rifleman. Thank you for listening to the RCB podcast. We are privileged that you have taken an interest in this part of our military and political history, as so very few have. We have nothing on our side other than public opinion to help us. It seems to us that very few in government care. This has been a production of the RCB Veterans Group. The podcast was written and produced by myself, Sean Arthur. I would especially like to thank the tireless efforts of the RCB Research Group, who have brought a level of professionalism in driving our collective efforts to the government's doorstep. I would also like to thank the RCB Veterans Group, who have been taking on the veteran fight for a very, very long time, especially at a period when the RCB space was mostly vacant. Both veteran groups have shown no lessening of resolve, even as the years roll on. And lastly, with the continuing thanks to the 9,000 Australian Army veterans who served at RCB between the years 1970 and 1989. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. There are many more to come. Thank you for listening.